Okay, Senate Bill 118 by Senator Morris. Welcome, Senator Morris.
Did you hand out
Th-
that map?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. If you give me just a second here, I've got a couple of handouts I'd like the committee, if the Sergeant at Arms could pass these out. Appreciate it.
That would be fine.
There, and here's some more. Mr. Chairman, I bring to you Senate Bill 118, commonly known as a constitutional or permitless carry bill in furtherance of our Second Amendment rights. As members of the committee are well aware, we currently have open carry in this state already. So this step is not that great a step forward when anybody over 18 is welcome to carry a weapon. The essence of this bill is that if you are over 21 or over, you're not convicted of a felony or a crime of violence, you may carry a concealed firearm without obtaining a permit from the government. You may still obtain a permit if you so choose under this bill, which is important for purposes of reciprocity with other states. In addition, I'm sure the committee is probably aware, but the move for constitutional carry is gaining momentum, and there are currently 20 states that have passed constitutional carry, and I've handed out a color-coded map showing all those that have already passed constitutional carry, and it's well on its way to being passed in Texas. It passed the House of Representatives in Texas just within the last week. Constitutional carry has existed in Arizona for 10 years, and there have been no ill effects in the crime rates in Arizona as a result, and many more have gone since then. The state of Vermont has had constitutional carry. You could carry a concealed weapon or open carry since 1790. It's always been there, and there appears to be no ill effect for those in Vermont. What the bill does not do, the bill does not make it easier to buy guns. It does not change who owns or doesn't own firearms. And the bill also maintains the obligation, as permit carriers have now, that if you're approached by a law enforcement official, you're under an obligation in an official capacity where he's in the course of his duties to disclose that you have a firearm on you. This bill also maintains the requirement that you do not, or you're not allowed to carry a concealed weapon, permit or no permit, if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This is a bill for law-abiding citizens. It is passing this bill will not embolden criminals. Criminals are already emboldened. I would like to say something really pithy here and profound, but my chief of police in West Monroe said it better than I could, and he was quoted recently in the Ouachita Citizen, and this is West Monroe Police Chief Jeff Terrell, and you're going to hear from the police in a minute who aren't especially fond of this bill. But, quote, "Based on my reading of the Constitution, it says you can keep and bear arms," Terrell said. "The founders made it clear restrictions don't hurt anyone but law-abiding citizens." When you look at it, the people that are not going to follow the law are criminals. They're going to carry where the law says they can or cannot. And with that, I will open this up for questions. Seated next to me is Dan Zelenko with the Louisiana Shooters Association. He may have a few words, but he could help me answer any technical questions you all may have that I can't answer.
But before we go into questions, let me recognize Senator Carter. I believe he had a request of this committee.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a fiscal note? Is there any fiscal impact with this?
There's no fiscal note that's attached. I have gotten information from state police that there will be a cost, and they have people here to testify it, but a fiscal note has not been produced at this point.
Is someone here to talk about that fiscal note, or will they just produce one at some point?
The state police is here to talk about the fiscal impact, and then I will go ahead.
Staff will prepare a note at some point, but they will speak to what they believe to be a fiscal impact.
That's correct, Senator.
If this may help the situation, I took the liberty of making a copy of the fiscal note for Danny McCormick's bill last year, House Bill 686, which is virtually identical, which is provides for permitless carry. And I'm happy to pass this out to committee. The Sergeant at Arms wants to assist in passing this out.
I think we should probably have one that's directly related to this.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
That's good as a
One-
backdrop,
but
but
if
we should
some-
probably still have.
Right, I understand. But if somebody wants the information that the fiscal office is likely to provide in this bill, I do have this information.
I'll make those available for the committee as well, but state
Okay.
police I know have some testimony as well as Senator Morris, which should be helpful.
And I want to just ask one other question, if I can.
Yes, Senator Carter.
Senator, so would any type of training be required?
No,
None whatsoever?
no.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll give you another chance, Senator Carter, on the substance of the bill. Mr. How do you say your last name?
Dan Zelenka.
Zelenka. Mr. Zelenka, did you want to add any opening comments before we go into questions?
Actually, I would. My name's Dan Zelenka, and I'm the president of the Louisiana Shooting Association. And I'm here in support of Senate Bill 118 because it's a law whose time has come. There's been a wave of constitutional carry laws across the United States. And as Senator Morris said, there are currently 20 states with constitutional carry laws and bills pending in another 6, some of which have made it through at least one house in that particular state. Constitutional carry has been the law of Vermont for 230 years. I would also like to note that there are 6 states that do not require any training whatsoever in order to get a permit. So the majority of the United States, you can get a permit without training. You're going to hear some testimony probably from the Bloomberg-supported Moms Demand Action and from some people in law enforcement that the sky will fall and blood will run in the streets if you pass this bill. We heard the exact same thing from similar anti-rights groups when shall-issue concealed carry laws were proposed and passed in more than 40 states. Their dire predictions proved to be unfounded. The 20 states that have constitutional carry have experienced no more issues than carry permit states, which is to say very, very few issues. I know I've looked at some information concerning the state of Idaho. They passed constitutional carry. Their murder rate actually went up, but their firearm murder rate dropped. I don't know. Louisiana is not stepping into the unknown here. There's a track record upon which we can rely. We have a good permit system, and it will stay in place. Permits provide reciprocity for carrying in other states and exempt you from a background check when you buy a firearm. They also allow you to carry in a restaurant. They also allow you to carry within 1,000 feet of a school. If you are constitutionally carrying without a permit, you can do neither under either state or federal law. People will still want permits. In fact, in a lot of places, the studies have been that permits have gone up, not down, in states that pass constitutional carry. So why permitless carry? Obtaining a concealed carry permit costs between $225 and $325 between the required training and the fee for the permit, and also the fee to get fingerprints. It also requires you to travel to and attend a 9-hour class. The cost of a permit in money and time disproportionately impacts economically disadvantaged populations who, unfortunately, often live in areas with higher crime rates, which means they have a greater need for self-defense. The permit system creates a financial barrier to exercising a constitutional right. People who are against the bill may claim that it will allow criminals to carry a firearm. This is false. In fact, anyone who is prohibited from purchasing a firearm and anyone who is prohibited from obtaining a concealed handgun permit will be prohibited from carrying a handgun under this bill. The prohibited categories include convicted felons, convicted domestic violence abusers, people adjudicated mentally incompetent, habitual drug users, including marijuana users, habitual alcoholics, people convicted of misdemeanor violent crimes, fugitives, illegal aliens, people with a dishonorable discharge from the military, or people with a history of violent behavior. This bill also requires when you carry that you not be under the influence of either alcohol or a controlled dangerous substance, and that when law enforcement stops you, you inform them that you are carrying. The Louisiana Constitution, Article 1, Section 11 says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and any infringement will be subject to strict scrutiny review. Strict scrutiny requires a compelling governmental interest in a narrowly tailored regulation. The fact that we have a constitutionally protected right to open carry in Louisiana and have been doing so without problems for years, coupled with the evidence provided by 20 other states' experience with constitutional carry, clearly shows that there's no compelling governmental interest in preventing a law-abiding citizen from carrying his legally owned firearm in a concealed manner without obtaining a permit to do so. The areas of the country that support the right to keep and bear arms are moving toward constitutional carry. Louisianians who overwhelmingly passed the strongest constitutional right to keep and bear arms of any state should not have any less freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and then I'll let the members ask you some questions as well. When I read the bill and I look at page 2 of the bill, it still talks about a concealed handgun permit being issued. That part was not all taken out. Is there going to be a situation where someone would still get a permit if this law were to pass?
Absolutely. In fact, there are many good reasons to have to obtain a concealed carry permit. One is reciprocity, because we currently have reciprocity with 39 other states, not all of which have constitutional carry, so you want it for that. Also, if you have a concealed handgun permit in Louisiana and you go buy a firearm from a federal firearms licensed dealer, you have to fill out the paperwork, but your permit stands for your background check. Okay, so you just present your permit, they write down your permit number and when it expires, and you can go on your way. That's especially nice at Christmas time. And like I said, you can carry in a restaurant that serves alcohol if you have a permit. There's a specific exclusion to RS 1495.5, which that's the prohibition from having a firearm in an alcoholic beverage outlet. There's a specific exclusion in that law that allows a permit holder to carry there. If you don't have a permit, whether you have constitutional carry or not, you cannot carry in an alcoholic beverage outlet. The same thing with the school zone. Our school zone law and the federal school zone law puts a 1,000-foot radius around the school, starting from the edge of the campus. If you have a Louisiana concealed handgun permit, you can carry within the 1,000-foot radius. You cannot carry on the campus itself. The federal law only provides an exclusion for those people with a permit that is issued by the state in which the school is located. As a matter of fact, if you have reciprocity, you actually can't get within the 1,000 feet in another state. So there are plenty of good reasons to get a permit. But some people don't travel, that may not be a concern, so there are reasons not to.
So does this bill, if it passes, would it affect where someone who's carrying a gun without a permit, concealed, where they can bring the gun as far as existing laws? You touched on schools, universities, bars. I know some of those areas right now it's prohibited. So if this bill were to pass, would there still be a prohibition to carry a concealed weapon without a permit?
Absolutely. Those prohibitions are not affected by this law. The only thing that's affected is the law concerning carrying a concealed firearm, which is 1495A1.
And does this bill, if it were to pass, would it have any effect on people who have been convicted of violent felonies getting their gun rights back? Would this affect?
I believe that you can't get your gun rights back if you're convicted of a crime of violence under Louisiana law. If you're convicted of a felony that's not a crime of violence and you have been 10 years post-conviction and you get it expunged, you can then, you have lifted the prohibition.
So if this bill were to pass, would it override any of those provisions, or would a convicted felon still have to go through the same steps they have to today?
The law would remain the same with respect to the convicted felon and the prohibition from them owning firearms.
Okay, and then my final question is, currently, it's my understanding if you carry a weapon and it's not concealed, a pistol on your side, that you would not have to have a permit. Is that current law? Is that your
That's current law. That, and as a matter of fact, there's at least one Louisiana Supreme Court case that says that that is a constitutional right in this state.
Let me
That's
turn.
what I meant at the beginning when I mentioned open carry. That's the right to carry in a non-concealed manner. It exists right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me turn.
Dan is a lawyer also, so he knows.
We
the
won't
law.
hold that against him since I am as well.
I know that, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go to Senator Mizell for some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know who would answer this, but just reading this, when you talk about there's a prohibition of being under the influence of alcohol, what's the consequence to that? What would be the process? Is it to the discretion of law enforcement? What happens at that point? Or
I think it would probably be the same as it now for permitted carry. If somebody has a permit, they're not supposed to be carrying when they're under the influence.
but what happens when they're found to be?
Well, they're violating the law. It's up to law enforcement to. They can be charged. Assuming they can lose their permit.
So
You know,
they can lose their permit?
I
or-
think so.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think that-
positive about the lose your permit. I'm not sure if there's a misdemeanor charge that goes along with it.
So what would happen then if they don't have a permit? And I'm just trying. I had a long talk with my grandchildren about this, and where they're raised in all these scenarios. You and I just. So I just would like to be able to have some clarity. Okay, if someone has a constitutional carry weapon. Is it up to the discretion of the law enforcement officer would just handle it in a way, or is it clearly outlined? This is what happens when someone with a weapon.
It's certainly clearly outlined with respect to the someone with a permit. I am not positive if there's a misdemeanor charge that goes along with the loss of your permit. And I don't want to say I think there is, but because I'm not positive. Okay.
But there are consequences.
There are consequences.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all.
Thank you, Senator Mizell. Let me ask Mr. Clement if he knows. In reading the bill, it looks like if this bill were to pass, that it would be a crime under 14:95, or in the criminal code, it would be a crime if someone were to carry a concealed weapon while they were drunk and they did not have a permit.
I believe whatever provisions would apply to that person under present laws would apply at the time. So if they've got are you talking in the case of a concealed carry permit?
If someone doesn't have, if this bill were to pass, and if someone were to have a concealed weapon, it looks to me like it's keeping the provision still about carrying the concealed weapon while intoxicated. Do you know if it would make it a crime or not?
Senator Foyle, I think I can answer that now.
I defer.
Very well.
Okay. There is a crime out there of negligently carrying a weapon, and that crime seems to be 40:1382. Okay, and it says in the bill, it says that someone that's carrying, that's under the influence of alcohol or controlled dangerous substance, can be charged as it says, is behaving in a criminally negligent manner as defined under the provisions of this section, or is negligent in carrying of a concealed handgun as provided under RS 401382. And so you could be charged with negligent carrying of a firearm. So yes, there is a misdemeanor consequence to this.
I appreciate that. Let me go to Senator Barrow. She has some questions for you. Senator Barrow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon, Senator Morris.
Good
Good afternoon, sir.
Senator Barrow.
I guess I have a list of questions and a lot of concerns. So if this kind of mirrors already what's in current law, what are we trying to fix?
Currently, in order to carry a concealed handgun, you must go through the permitting process. You must.
Which tell me what that permitting process looks like.
There is a required training, so you have to go hire a trainer, okay, and pay him. The training takes 9 hours. Most of the training takes place really in suburban and rural areas, so you have to travel to it. Typically, training costs somewhere between $100 and $200. You have to get fingerprinted, which costs between $10 and $20. And then you have to pay the state police for the permit, which is $125 for a 5-year permit. So your total cost is somewhere, let's just call it around $300 to obtain a permit. Okay. If you don't have the $300 or the 9 hours that you can go spend in a class or a way to get to the class, then your only option is, if you want to carry a firearm, is to carry it illegally. Now, you may be an upstanding, law-abiding citizen, but if you can't afford to go through the permitting process, then you have no way to carry it legally concealed, okay? Yes, you could strap it on your hip, on the outside of your clothing, and carry it. I think that has its own problems, okay? I think that causes public concern where it doesn't need to be. Merely the act of putting you've got a constitutional right to carry it openly. Merely the act of putting a jacket on or untucking your T-shirt would cause you to be subject to criminal prosecution.
So as I am listening really closely, because I want to make sure that I'm hearing you, it seems like your only issue is the fact that the cost associated with having to get a permit is the reason why we are bringing the bill.
No, it's not just that. It's a constitutional right. It's a liberty argument. It's the freedom to do what you want, to protect your family, and without having to go to the government to ask permission. That's one of the driving forces behind this, and the fact that it requires a government bureaucracy to give you permission, and you have to pay. And according to the fiscal note from last year, $5 million is estimated to be extracted from citizens who are merely exercising their constitutional rights. So that's kind of the driving force behind it.
Okay, so we have to, in order to drive, we have to have a driver's license, correct?
Right.
And that costs us to get, but it's
Right.
one of the
Driving is
no. Let me finish.
Okay.
It's one of the rights
It's a
that if you
privilege.
a privilege, right? It's a privilege, but it's one that one choose to do, and they have to pay for it, and the government is a part of it.
Right.
This is a constitution, and so you choose to or want to have a gun,
It's the
but you can still have the gun without having to take away the permitting process here.
It's the difference between a privilege and a right. That the right to drive is not in the Constitution, but the right to keep and bear arms is.
It is, and we can carry guns now, open carry, right? That's
That's
lawful, right?
That's right.
We just went through that whole process. So if a person don't want to have it open, then they can choose at that point where they can go through the permitting process if they want. But right now they can carry openly.
That's correct.
I mean, everybody can see that they have it on. So
That's why this isn't that great of an extension, really. But I think it's an important one. You know, some people are not comfortable carrying openly. They don't want to, and they shouldn't have to go before the government and pay fees and get permission to exercise that right.
So you do you think it's wrong to go through training to use a gun?
No, absolutely not. I think everyone should.
But is that part of the process? The permitting process?
I just don't. I don't
No,
want.
no, is it?
I don't want to make it mandatory. I don't want to make it It's not mandatory for open carry either. Currently, it is mandatory under the permitting scheme, but the training is something that is important, and everybody should go through it. And as it's my understanding, and perhaps Mr. Zelenka can speak to this better than I, but training courses after open carry is passed, or constitutional carry is passed, training courses get filled up. More people get training after a bill like this passes. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's my understanding. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
There'll be someone testifying today who is a professional trainer, and actually he trains all over the U.S., and he has those facts and figures for you.
But with this bill, as it's written right now, training would be taken out of it. It would not be required.
Correct.
Okay, but you don't think that, but you just said that you think training is important and everybody should be trained.
Correct. I'm just not
Okay,
gonna
I
make
just
it
want to make sure we're clear on that part.
Right.
Okay, so for me, there are a couple of things that really bothers me about this. We are where we are oftentimes in this state and in the country because of policies that are made and decided upon. For police officers, and this is my assumption, so I'm going to wait to hear from them, but they will have to now assume every time they stop an individual, if this bill passes, that they are armed.
They probably do anyway.
Well, they can attest to that, but they will have to assume. So any wrong
I think
movement,
they probably would have to assume now, because somebody could be illegally carrying a concealed weapon, or they could have a permit. So
But-
I would think they would assume.
but even more so now, because if this bill passes, then more than likely an individual can be carrying a gun that they are not trained to use, and the police officer, if they are reaching for their driver's license, insurance card, could assume that they're making a wrong move, which can lead to poor consequences of things that we are looking at right now across our country. That, for me, is one of the bigger issues. And when the police officers come, I'm going to ask them about that, because I believe that this now can place us in a much worse place as it relates to individuals who are not going to be required to be trained and can be carrying a concealed weapon. And when officers approach them, they would have no idea. And they would have to assume every person they stop.
I think they do now, but
I don't know if they absolutely do now. I mean,
they should.
I know
don't
that they're
I would
cautious.
assume I think they
But-
should be, because anybody could be carrying legally or illegally. So,
but it's going to increase, to me, the level of their perception and their belief that every time they stop an individual that they're carrying a concealed weapon. I believe that we just talked about with Senator Ward's bill about investment and the rate of return when we make investments on the front end. I think an individual who is wanting to carry a weapon should have to go through training, and $300 is not too much for them to pay for that right, especially for 5 years. I mean, when you break that down by 5 years, that's pennies on the dollar, really, for someone to be properly trained to carry a concealed weapon. And I think that is a responsible thing to do. I think it's responsible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. At this point, I don't have any more questions for the two of you, but I would like to call State Police up next for some information before we go into the rest of the proponents of the bill. So I have Jarrett Sandifer and Connor Junkin from State Police. Yes, sir. So, Senator Morris, if you don't mind,
Sure.
letting them take the table, that would be great. So if you gentlemen can both just state your name for the record.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, committee members, good afternoon. My name is Jared Sandifer. I'm a lieutenant with Louisiana State Police Bureau of Criminal Records, and as part of my duties, I work in the concealed handgun permit unit.
Mr. Chair, committee members, this is Connor Junkin. I represent the Department of Public Safety and Corrections in the Office of Legal Affairs.
Very well. If you heard earlier, Senator Carter had some questions about the fiscal impact. If you could address that, and then maybe some of the other members may have some additional questions, and I'll let them ask at that time.
Certainly. So I can talk a little bit about the fiscal impact this would have. So last year in 2020, Louisiana State Police revenue was over $4 million, approximately $4.5 million. And I can tell you that as a result of, many of you probably remember the Ryuk ransomware attack, our system was actually greatly affected, our concealed handgun permit unit system. So we were unable to issue permits for a while. And also COVID-19 issues. Many people were not able to take classes. Many instructors weren't offering classes. Therefore, a lot of people weren't able to apply. So I believe if those two issues hadn't affected us, there probably would have been a greater revenue. I can tell you at this time last year, the concealed handgun permit unit issued only about 5,000 permits due to those issues we had. To date this year, we've issued almost 13,000 permits.
Any other questions for the members? I don't see any other questions. Was there anything else you wanted to provide?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm basically here to advise Lieutenant Sandifer on any legal issues or questions that may arise.
Yes, sir.
Senator Barrow, did you have? I'm sorry, Senator Carter.
So does the department not have a position on the bill?
Oh, we do not have a position. We're just here to provide as much information as needed so people can make an educated decision.
Okay, so state police does not have a position.
No, sir.
Just to be clear.
They're here for information
For
purposes.
informational purposes only, yes, sir.
Senator Barrow.
So just go back through again. What would be the fiscal impact if this bill was passed?
So for state police fiscal impact, it's an unknown impact because we don't know how many people would or would not apply. If we're reading the bill correctly, Louisiana residents would not have to apply for a concealed carry permit. But unfortunately, we don't know how many would or would not apply. Now, people would still apply if they wanted out-of-state reciprocity, so people would still be, required to pay for that permit.
So I heard you go through a kind of some numbers of which y'all received. Was it 2019, but before COVID or whatever? So I would assume that most people probably would not apply because most of them may not want to travel out of state. So that would be a huge impact financially to the department. And how would that have to be made up if you guys sustain that type of cut? Would we have to take it from some other place in the state budget?
I can't speak on where else it would come from, but all I can say is there is a possibility that fewer people would apply for a concealed carry permit.
So as it relates to individuals carrying or having to get a permit, how and I don't know if you are at liberty to speak to this, but how would state police feel now approaching, if this bill were to pass, what would be the impact of that as state police officers are now being trained? Let me ask that question, as they're being trained when approaching a vehicle.
So I'm not going to talk about the training aspect of it, but I can tell you when people apply for a concealed carry permit, they actually have that permit on them. So if there's a law enforcement interaction, that police officer will be able to see that person has that concealed carry permit. They will understand that they have gone through some type of training. They have gone through some type of understanding of the laws related to it. One thing it would likely put on the officer in the field is the burden of, if a person doesn't have that permit, they don't know what their criminal background is. They haven't undergone that criminal background check that permit holders are required to undergo.
Okay. I don't know if that really kind of answered my question, but
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. Senator Ward, you have Senator White's mic pushed. If you. Oh, okay. Senator White's mic is on then, but it's Senator Ward, just for the public.
Yeah, thank you. Just out of curiosity, and not that you would necessarily have any reason to keep up with other states, but if you have y'all tracked what happens when a bill like this is passed in terms of permits? Do those numbers typically drop off in any big way, or do they even go up? I've heard that they might the numbers may even go up. Is there anybody that knows statistically what that looks like?
I do not know statistically, no, sir.
Maybe we'll come across somebody that has that answer as
Maybe
we
so.
go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ward. That's all the questions we have, so thank you. Sure.
Yes.
Let me recognize Senator Carter.
Have you taken into account any public safety issues relative to this at all?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of.
So you don't believe there is?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of.
And there are going to be some other law enforcement people who have cards as well. So let me let this group go, and I'm going to start calling. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you for your time.
And let me tell everyone in the audience, it's my intention that everyone that wants to speak, to let you speak today. And I'll also read the cards from you who are not speaking to make sure it's in the record that you either support or oppose the bill. So my request to those who want to speak, we have a number of cards. So to be fair to everyone and give everyone a chance, I'd ask that you try to limit your comments to about 3 minutes and to not be repetitive. But if you want to speak, I'm certainly going to let you speak. Sure, Senator Carter.
A statement that was passed out to us by the superintendent of New Orleans Police, Sean Ferguson, who is in opposition to this bill. I think it was passed out. You didn't get it? That's why I'd like to submit it as evidence and ask that it be passed out to everyone and read into the record
Very, very well. We can do that. I'd ask.
at the appropriate time.
Sure. Senator Carter, if you could get that to the Sergeant at Arms, and we'll have them to take care
I
of
will.
that. Okay, let me read some cards, and we can take 2 people at a time at the table, so just make your way up front if you still want to speak. And if you believe that you don't no longer wish to speak based on the testimony, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to start calling the names out. So first we'll have Dan Zelenko's already spoken, Walter Brown, and Chris Patrone. Are either of you here? Mr. Brown or Mr. Patrone?
Patron.
It's Mr. Patrone. Walter Brown, please come up. If you'll briefly quickly say your name and just let us give us your testimony, please.
I'm Chris Patron, and I represent the firearms professionals of Louisiana. Might be easier without this. We're the folks in the purple shirt that you see all around the room. We run the radio ads. We do mailings in the districts. We're very proactive. We're grassroots type folks. We expect every Republican to vote for this bill because it's just something that represents the people that you guys got elected by. We shouldn't need the government's permission to defend ourselves. That's basically what this is about. And to Senator Barrow's remarks about the making it more dangerous for police and so forth. Actually, I don't think it is going to be more dangerous. And the reason is the only thing we're adding here is law-abiding citizens are going to be carrying concealed. The ones that don't abide by the law, they carry already. This is not new. So I don't think that the police are going to have a bigger exposure to danger because of this bill. I was a policeman for 12 years, so I know what I'm talking about. The thing is that if I'm sick in bed at home late at night and I'm out of the pills that I need to help me through my case, and my wife has to go out to an all-night pharmacy, well, she's scared. You would be too if you read the newspapers. She shouldn't have to get the government's permission to put a defensive firearm in her purse to protect her own safety. So that's the thing that I was wanting to say. And also, I wanted to point out that, as someone else pointed out, I believe, it's more important in the poor neighborhoods that we have this constitutional carry than in the wealthier neighborhoods. The rich people who live in gated communities, they don't need to have a carry, although they probably can afford it and they get it. It's the poor people who don't have the time, the 9 hours of training, or the access to getting that training, or the $300+ to get trained and get this permit. They're the ones who are getting shortchanged. So that would be something else I would say. It just goes without saying that the criminals aren't going to be impeded by not having the government's permission to carry. They already carry without a permit. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'm going to have a question for you in a minute, but I'm going to let Mr. Brown speak first, and then we'll open up to questions.
Good afternoon, Senators. I thought it was quite ironic that the majority of Senator Barrow's questions were based on closing down a right that we have, not a privilege. The Second Amendment is a right. Her questions were based on how is it affected versus having to get the permit. And tellingly, the second point, which was very interesting, was when she was asking about anyway, this is a right, and I have to disagree with Senator Morris on one point. Not only does concealed carry have an effect on crime, states that get concealed that have constitutional carry, crime goes down. For instance, in 2015, Maine instituted constitutional carry. In the most recent study after 2015 that showed the safest states in the country, guess which state was number one? Maine. Which state was number two? Vermont, which, as we heard, constitutional carry. This is not a big change in the law. This is a right that American citizens have, and that I believe that this bill should pass through this committee.
Thank you. Senator Barrow has some questions.
No, I do have questions, but I'm going to respond first to Mr. Patron and to Mr. Brown. So my question was as it relates to, you talked about constitutional right, but it can also be taken away from you when you violate it, just as driving. And my question was really regarding the training around that, which I thought was appropriate, which the author agreed. Whether you conceal or not conceal, training to me is important. We have too many people who have accidentally died by the misuse of weapons. The other comment that was made, I think by you, Mr. Patron, by every Republican should vote for this, as if Democrats don't care about the constitutional right to bear arms. And I would hope that we don't make this a partisan issue, because I do believe in individuals' right to carry. I also believe in the right to be responsible in carrying. And my question, as it was related to our law enforcement, which I will wait to hear from, because we've had so many incidents that happen in this country. The last one that just happened, where a seasoned law officer mistakenly pulled out her gun instead of her taser, and as a result of that, someone ended up dead. So my question and my concern is, because of that and those kind of incidents that have happened across our country, is this going to perpetuate that? Because now officers will have to assume, and this is my thinking, that every time they pull up, and I know that they're always cautious, but now they have to assume everybody that they pull over is carrying a concealed weapon or has a weapon. And they don't know if they go to get their license, if they go to get their driver insurance card, if they're pulling a gun, or if they're trying to get the information that they've asked them to get. And that can lead to more innocent people dying. That's my concern. And I'll wait for law enforcement to answer that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I respond, please?
Thank you. Briefly.
Two things that weren't raised during these questioning. One, according to this bill, anyone who is constitutionally carrying, thank you, is required to advise any law enforcement officer who stops them for any reason that they are carrying a firearm. So we have that. Number two, your lawful concealed carry carriers, I believe, will get training regardless of whether they have to get a permit or not, because they want to follow the law, they want to be good citizens, and most importantly, they want to be able to defend themselves properly, and they can't do that if they don't get training.
So you just said, which is a contradiction to me, that most people you believe will go through the process and get the permit. Is
No.
that what you just said?
No. If they'll get the training.
They'll get the training.
Yeah, not the person.
Is there a cost for that?
For the training?
Yes.
Sure.
So most of the arguments seem to have been around the cost associated with this.
That's not how I see it. To me, similar to Senator Morris, this is a right, the right to defend yourself. Not only is it a God-given human nature right, it is a constitutional right.
Is it being taken away from people at this point?
It is for anyone who does not have access to the funds or have access to go and meet and the time to do the training with an individual.
But just like individuals who drive, I mean, you have to go through training to drive. To be to use your driver's license, you have to go through training to drive. And you just said to me, though, that you believe that most people will go through the training so they will know how to properly use the firearm.
I do.
I don't see the problem we're trying to correct. I just don't see that as a problem that we're really trying to correct. And honestly, in my community, so since we talked about poor people, so the people that I represent, what some of the people that I heard you guys referring to, none of them have complained about the cost associated with getting their permit. As a matter of fact, they just go, they do it, and they own it. If they want to have a gun, they own one, and they go through the process of doing so.
That well, if I may
Thank-
respond, Senator, just briefly.
That's-
They don't
that's-
complain because they don't have a choice.
Mr. Brown, let's go on to some other witness. I do appreciate you coming and testifying today. Thank you, Mr.
Did you have a
Petrone.
question for me? You said you had a question for me.
Well, it was Mr. Brown answered it.
Okay.
So let's. We have some other people that would like to speak, but thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Senator.
Everett Bodine is present and would like to speak. Barrett Kendrick is present and would like to speak. Mr. Bodine, Mr. Kendrick.
Yes, please.
Come on up. Please have a seat. Good afternoon, Mr. Bodine.
Senator Boyle?
Mr. Kendrick, if you want to state your name for the record and go first.
Sure. Love to. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barrett Kendrick. I currently serve as the Vice President of the Louisiana Shooting Association, as well as I am a full-time personal defense instructor, mainly inside of the firearms industry. I'm glad to have the opportunity today, and thank you for giving me the time to talk. Yeah, one of the big concerns that has obviously come up today has been training, and obviously, I do work as a full-time instructor, so I see a lot of this stuff. As mentioned previously, that open carry is currently constitutionally protected in Louisiana without training, without background checks, without training. Someone who is not prohibited under state or federal law to be able to own that firearm is allowed to have that firearm in on their person as long as it is not concealed. So we're already, as mentioned, we're not blazing a new path there. We're already doing that, as well as many other states have already done that as well. There's 6 states that do not require any sort of training to get the concealed handgun permit in the first place as well. There was a RAND study released last year that also found that there's zero evidence that mandatory firearms training would have any direct effect on the reduction of negative or of positive outcomes. So when they're looking at mandatory training on how it would change things like mass shootings or violence in general, domestic violence or hunting recreation, officer-involved shootings, what they found is they did not come up with any evidence to show that it would have any significant impact either to make things better or to make things worse on that mandatory training requirement. What instructors, and we have actually found after states have passed some form of constitutional carry, is that there has been a desire for training to go up, is that more people are learning about it, more people are going out and learning to and paying for or signing up for the organizations that may help supplement the training classes, but they're going out there and more people are getting trained. But they're able to really take a training class that is specifically designed for them, for their needs, and not generalized by the state for a check in the box for the concealed carry permit, but they're learning to how to use that firearm in the context of what that person may have to use one. So if you have someone that is only worried about it for home defense, well, they can go take a class that's really geared towards home defense. Or if you have somebody that spends their life as a driver, or maybe even in a wheelchair, that they're able to go out and get training in the context of using a firearm in a seated position, and not some generalized class that's one size fits all for everybody. What was brought up, a couple of things I want to make sure that were addressed with. When it comes to vehicle stops and concern with law enforcement would have to assume that those people have firearms. what's important to understand is, like I talked about a second ago, is you don't need a permit to have a firearm in your possession. So as current law sits, and this would not change any of that, is that someone could legally have a firearm in their possession inside of that vehicle. What this would do, though, is anybody who's carrying that firearm concealed under the constitutional carry side of things, it would now add the requirement that that person is actually required by law to notify that law enforcement that they are carrying a weapon on their person, are carrying that firearm, on that person. So I'm trying not to repeat anything that was covered, but in times when applications go up, it can take several months to get the application processed. Just this recent March, Louisiana State Police notified instructors that they have a very large backlog of mailed-in applications. There is an electronic method to apply for the permit, but there's a lot of people who have no choice but to use the paper application. Maybe they don't have access to computers, or they don't have access to printers, so they're forced to mail things in. Well, currently the state police is a very long backlog, and I'm quoting those words there of the email that's sent out on, and opening up and making it through those applications themselves. It can take several months for the Louisiana State Police to be able to process fingerprints that are mailed in or documents that are mailed in. And so currently there's only one place in the entire state of Louisiana that you can be fingerprinted electronically for the purpose of the concealed carry permit application and actually have it submitted along with your application. So if you're not doing it at the state police headquarters in Baton Rouge, you have no option but to mail that in. And that takes months long to be able to do so. We already heard about the issues last year with the systems that were down at the state level for different reasons, as well as the shutdown during COVID-19. So there were several months where people didn't have the option to be able to get the permit at all. And so I think that is something that really has to be thought about. Many times people decide to carry firearms because they're facing a higher risk in their life. Maybe they're dealing with somebody that is making threats against them. They may have protective orders in place, and thankfully a couple of years ago we did make it a little bit easier for that person to be able to apply for and get a concealed handgun permit, but it's still a roadblock for them to be able to do so. So different times, the chance of violence or the chance of risk for somebody may go up. This allows them the opportunity to be able to carry the firearm legally until they actually have the permit in hand to be able to do so. Or even during events of emergency, state of emergencies such as the floods that we saw in 2016, or in March of 2016, or again later in that year, and even again in 2018, where people are cut off from first responders and cut off from law enforcement, where under current law they would not be allowed to legally conceal that firearm, but this would give them the ability to be able to do so. Thankfully, with my work, I do get to work with all kinds of different demographics, all over the country. But most of the students who are coming into my classes, it are people that have extra time and they have extra money. The required training, the permitting process, and the fingerprinting does put a heavy roadblock on those that don't have the expendable income or the expendable resources and time. As mentioned previously, for some, this cost is $325 to be able to do so. And I know for the people showing up to my classes is that if somebody is barely able to get by and is living paycheck by paycheck, $300 is a lot of money for that individual. And I know that because I've had people who have called me who want the training, who can't afford to be able to go through it, and I've worked with them. At different times, I've put people on payment plans to be able to work out so they can come take the class, and that roadblock's already gone through. I've provided free training at different times for different people as well. But $300 is a lot for somebody who can barely get by. And so it's for these reasons that I do urge you to vote favorably on Senate Bill 118 today. If you have questions, I certainly want to make sure that I'm addressing that. One other point that I want to make sure that that was covered, and as I'm not an attorney, I don't have a background in law. I do have a basic understanding of Louisiana law when it comes to concealed handgun permits and firearms in general. So I just want to make sure that everybody does understand that the current law in regards to Louisiana concealed handgun permit, if you are carrying under the influence of alcohol, the way current law is currently written is you have now voided your concealed carry permit. So if you were carrying, you would be carrying in the sense of carrying without the permit in general. And that's the way that it currently sits with state law, being that if somebody was carrying while under the influence of alcohol with the permit, they would now be voiding that concealed carry permit and can then be charged under 1495. Additionally, with the constitutional carry, my understanding of it is the same thing in the sense that if someone is carrying under the influence of alcohol or a controlled dangerous substance, then they're violating what is being written into the constitutional carry bill and would then also be subject to illegal concealed carrying of that weapon under 1495. So I just want to make sure that that was talked about in addition to the negligent concealed carry that was previously discussed.
Mr. Kendrick, let me stop you here because we do have some questions from Senator Barrow.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Kendrick, over the last probably 30 years, it appears that more than 14,000 people were not granted permits after they went through the background check. And I think that is part of the process that we have in place now. So if this would pass, because you are a trainer, how do you think that would impede in terms of what's going to happen on the street? People not trained. And then we have people who didn't pass background checks over the last 30 years, 14,000 of them. It seemed like we would have a lot of more folks on the street now carrying guns that probably don't deserve to have them.
Yes, ma'am. In regards to criminal background checks, if they are prohibited by Louisiana state law or by the federal government from being in possession of that firearm, then they would not be allowed to carry under this bill just as it is under current law. If they're a prohibited person, this doesn't change it in any way. So even with the permitting process, if the person is truly a prohibited person, that's why they're getting denied for the concealed carry permit. This doesn't change that. It's not going to now give them permission because they're already a denied individual or a prohibited person.
So individuals with mental health issues, I heard you talking about under the influence. That bothers me a little bit because if a person is under the influence and something happens, unfortunately, if something happens, that's going to be after the fact that they will no longer be able to carry their weapon. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am, but it's kind of like driving down the road. If you drive 120 miles an hour down the road, you're violating the law at that point. If you drive off the road and injure or kill passengers inside of your car, you were still violating the law leading up to that because you were driving at a reckless rate of speed. And that wouldn't change things with the firearm. If somebody's violating the law, they're already violating the law, and the constitutional carry bill doesn't change that prior to, during or after that.
But it'll be after the fact. It'll be after they've committed a crime or something
We would
that's
learn about it in the aftermath, just like we would with other crimes being committed. Yes, ma'am.
And so I'm assuming domestic violence will stay the same. It wouldn't change as well. I know that we are already having some issues as it relates to individuals who have had weapons, who have been in domestic situations, and in some cases have been able to get them back, even though they shouldn't have. But somehow there have been ways that they have been able to get those weapons back.
Yes, ma'am. Under federal law, if somebody has a restraining order, a temporary protective order against them, or if they have been convicted under domestic violence, that person is a prohibited individual, and they would not be allowed to have those firearms. And this is not going to change that in any way.
So as a trainer, do you think training is important?
I think training is important in any sort of endeavor, throughout life, whether I'm in my backyard cutting up wood or where we're learning about firearms. Yes, ma'am, I do believe that training is important.
Training is important. Okay, thank you.
Having an understanding of how to use things. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Ward has some questions.
Thank you. And you seem to have a good understanding, so maybe you can answer this. It's something I've been trying to kind of wrap my mind around. So right now, if you have a permit and something happens, the permit gets pulled and you can no longer have that. But if we then go to you don't have to have a permit, and that same instance happens, I guess there's two scenarios in my mind. So number one, if you lose your permit, which comes with some benefits like reciprocity in other states and things like that, you can't get your permit, or you can no longer have the permit, but can you still constitutionally carry? That's one question. And then the second question is, if you don't have the permit, so it's just a constitutional carry, and the same instance happens, what are the consequences since you don't have the permit to lose? Any thoughts on that?
Certainly. So, in regards to someone being prohibited where they've had their permit taken away, something like driving under the influence, right? If somebody gets convicted under driving under the influence, they will have their permit revoked, and it's revoked for a period of 5 years.
Okay.
Under this law, the way that it is currently written, I believe that the person is still prohibited from being able to carry that firearm concealed under the constitutional carry side of things, because we still have the limitations as written as part of 1379.3.
Perfect. That clears it up for me, because I was just confused. I didn't want it to end up in a situation where if you had the permit, if you went through the process of getting a permit, you had something to lose that somebody who didn't, if that makes sense. So
yes, sir. And I believe Mr. Zelenka, when he was reading off all of those reasons somebody could be prohibited under carrying under constitutional carry, when he was reading that, that's also listed under Title 40, 1379.3.
okay.
Those same types of circumstances.
If I missed something, I
No, and
apologize.
I just want to make sure that we understand where that's coming from, that it is written in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ward. Mr. Bodine, if you could introduce yourself and provide any comments, and then Carrie Winnisms, WINNISMS would be next. So I'll let Mr. Bodine start, and Mr. Kendrick, if you can exit the table.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Thank you,
Bodine?
everyone.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Senator Foyle. My name is Everett Bodion. I am an attorney here in Baton Rouge, and I'm also a concealed handgun permit instructor. And you may remember me from the Senate District 16 race, and I apologize for the recount. But
I do.
There's been a lot of stuff said today about Second Amendment rights, and I agree, of course, that Second Amendment rights are important. But we are in Louisiana, and as Mr. Zelenka said, we have Louisiana Constitution, Article 1, Section 11. And Article 1, Section 11 was amended by the voters of the state of Louisiana in 2012. And that changed the previous language. The previous language of Article 1, Section 11 specifically allowed the state to regulate the concealed carry of weapons. That part of Article 1, Section 11 was removed and replaced with any restrictions for keeping or bearing arms are subject to strict scrutiny. That was passed by a vote of 73.5% of the voters in Louisiana in the 2012 presidential election as a ballot initiative. However, despite this change, which specifically removed the state's authority to regulate the carrying of concealed weapons and adding in that strict scrutiny, the status quo has remained basically unchanged for the last 9 years now. So based on the new wording of our state constitution, constitutional carry, like this bill attempts to do and like many bills that came before it attempted to do, should already be the law of the land in my legal opinion. But all those legislative attempts have failed, despite the fact that it is catching on in a lot of the country, as has been testified at length before. So I would like to reiterate that all this bill does, again, is removes a single misdemeanor crime from the criminal code, and that's illegal carrying of weapons under 1495. And it doesn't even remove the entire misdemeanor crime. It only removes the misdemeanor crime if you comply with the specific set of circumstances that is laid out in this, which are the same requirements that someone with a permit would have to do as far as eligibility and not carrying under the influence. So again, it doesn't do that much, but it is a beneficial thing for the citizens of the state of Louisiana to hopefully finally get something in response for their overwhelming vote to change our state constitution in 2012. So as a libertarian, I would like to also underscore the fact that illegal carrying of weapons is a victimless crime. No one has been victimized by someone who is simply carrying a weapon. If someone is victimized, that is also a separate crime that they will be prosecuted for. And so in the same way that victimless crimes for possession of narcotics, for example, have usually a disproportionate impact on poor communities and people of color, carrying concealed weapons without a permit also seems to be prosecuted more strongly against people who are already disadvantaged. And Senator Barrow previously mentioned the Dante Wright shooting in Minnesota that happened recently when the officer went for her taser and then accidentally shot Mr. Wright. The warrant that was out for Mr. Wright's arrest was for illegal carrying of weapons without a permit. So the fact that it was illegal for Mr. Wright to be carrying a weapon without a permit is the reason for that stop in the first place and the reason that he was accidentally killed by law enforcement. So most of the other stuff that I was going to say has already been addressed at length. The last thing I wanted to say is regarding the fiscal impact. Again, I believe that any costs that are associated or lost revenue for state police will be more than made up for in reduced incarceration and arrests and prosecution for people for what this victimless crime is.
Senator Barrow, did you have a question for this witness?
Well, I just want to go back to the situation with Dante Wright, because I believe that was a traffic violation that he was initially stopped for.
Yes, ma'am.
That what he was stopped for. But then when they ran his ID, then that's when they found out about that. What I was speaking to was the nervousness, perhaps, I don't even know. I don't know enough about that to really speak to her intent or what happened, but what they have said on the news is how a seasoned officer of 26 years mistakenly used her gun instead of her taser. And that, what I'm talking about, is what may happen as a consequence as it relates to officers when they make stops. That's what I was referring to.
Yes.
I was just talking about how officers now, especially new officers in training, well, now they're going to have to, if this bill will pass, they will have to always keep in mind when they stop in their car, the person in the car, man or woman, black or white or any other color, that they have a weapon that is not registered.
Yes, and I do understand the distinction, Senator Barrow, but I would also like to reiterate, as Mr. Kendrick said, under revised statute Title 1495.2, we have a specific constitutional right to have a firearm within a privately owned motor vehicle. So at least with regards to traffic stops, maybe not Terry stops on the street, but with regard to traffic stops, the status quo with regard to law enforcement should not change in any meaningful way, because already any citizen of the state of Louisiana can lawfully have a gun inside their motor vehicle, whether or not it's in the glove box or console or under the seat or anything like that. And so I don't believe this is going to significantly change the way that law enforcement reacts to traffic stops, but it would have changed whether or not there was an attempt to make an arrest in that case in Minnesota, hypothetically, were to happen here.
Thank you for your testimony today, and thank you for coming out, and the board's cleared.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read the rest of the cards in support of the bill. It's my understanding from looking at these cards that they do not wish to speak, and then we'll get to the opposition. And so all these do not wish to speak, but are in favor of the bill. Ronnie Blunt, Chana Pichot, Gary Billier, Dana Easterly, Kathleen Benfield, Mike Burris, John Brink, Sandy Mumphrey, Penny Patrone, Carl Rabelais, Andrea Pilot, Jacques Mamou, Troy Rizan, Wayne Hebert, Michael Boudreau, Bernard Friel, Lewis White, Charles Doyes, Brian Guillory, Marilyn Prelis, Rolf Perilous, and Henry Ellis. So now what we're going to do is go to the opponents of the bill and give them a chance to speak. And I'd like to first call up Fabian Blasch and Mike Knaps with the Police Chief Association. At the request of Senator Carter, I'm going to read the email, and we did get lots of emails on this bill, and I'm not going to read every email, but I'm going to give you the breakdown, but I'll read this one particularly since Senator Carter has requested this. This is from Superintendent Sean Ferguson with the NOPD. We strongly oppose any legislation that would create the potential for what could be thousands of untrained individuals bringing weapons to the streets of New Orleans. Add the consumption of alcohol by these armed individuals, and a very dangerous situation could develop, resulting in needless injury and death of our citizens and visitors. New Orleans is facing the same challenges many cities across the country are facing with the increase in violent crime. We have seen the increase in arrests for homicide, shootings, and armed carjacking. Because of the restrictions required by COVID-19, the wheels of justice are moving slower for many of those arrested individuals, putting more arrested individuals back on the street as they await justice. The current laws in place regarding the illegal carrying of concealed weapons have played a major role in reducing incidents of gun violence. Law enforcement officers will also put at increased risk when encountering an individual they do not know is armed. It is for these reasons that I vehemently oppose this legislation. This email, along with all the other ones that have been sent in, will be made part of the record for this committee. So, Mr. Blaish, if you would like to proceed, or Mr. Knapp, it doesn't matter which order.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And Mr. Chairman, to the committee, I represent the Chiefs of Police Association as the executive director. And our concern, I listened to everything that was said, and bottom line is we're not opposed to concealed carry. What we're opposed to is concealed carry without education and without training. That's basically our concern. And everything that has been said here, even by the proponents of the bill, indicates that training is one of the most important parts of it. What is not being taken into consideration is what Superintendent Ferguson mentioned. You've got to think about the fact that you've got these urban areas where you've got 21-year-olds who some are definitely illegally carrying. But once you put the word out that a 21-year-old can carry as long as he doesn't have a record, that's the only thing they're going to hear. I don't have a record. I'm 21 years old. I can conceal carry. That is going to increase the number of concealed carries in the urban areas considerably. Whether it's going to affect how the police approach them or not, bottom line is I've been in law enforcement for 56 years. I've been commissioned. And every time I stop, I concern myself with the possibility of what's possible in that vehicle or whatever. And then now you're talking about pedestrians. Pedestrians would conceal carry. In a car, they could have it on the floor, whatever, and so forth. Now you're talking about under their clothing. Think about Bourbon Street under their clothing. Think about the urban areas where you have a lot of people, and these 21-year-olds are now all packing. I think it's something that law enforcement has to really fear. We already have problems with firearms in this country. It's something that is ongoing. Now, with this, I think is just going to increase the problem. Regardless to what their statistics say about these other places like Maryland and Maine and all these different, Maine and Vermont, not Maryland, Maine and Vermont. I mean, you're talking about practically what you call a rural state. So I understand why they say it decreased or they didn't have as many killings. The point being is they're not talking about metropolitan areas in this country.
Mr. Knapp, if you want to introduce yourself and provide some brief
Mike
remarks.
Knapps. I am the legislative chairman for the Louisiana Chiefs of Police Association. 35 years with the Baker Police Department, and the last 5 years I've been with the association, and so it's been commissioned for right at 40 years now. We don't believe that as a law enforcement group that anybody's being violated a constitutional right, because everybody said you can open carry if you wish to. And if a law enforcement officer sees an open carry come out of a vehicle, they obviously see it because it's open carry and they treat it in that manner. We just are concerned about the fact that safety this is not for the officer, this is for the person that doesn't have to have the permit. Their safety, their family's safety, for not being educated on the process of how to handle the weapon, how to secure it, not when they're carrying it, this is in the non-carry situation. How are they going to do that? Who's going to train them to tell them? And they should be learning these things in the concealed class. Also, when the part comes where it's time for them to carry the weapon, when legally can they use it? What gives them the right to use that weapon that they're carrying? And they're not receiving that education either, and I think that's presented in a concealed carry class. I think it's just important that we educate our people and train them, not taking anything from them, just giving them a better benefit to do it right. And as we said, $60 a year, which is $5 a month, which is less than $1 a day, is probably something everybody can afford.
Senator Barrow has some questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I know you guys heard my line of questioning, and I heard you, Colonel Blanche, as you stated. You know, when you come into a car, you are always concerned. But now I know officers would have to be more concerned. But you then brought out pedestrians, and that means anybody walking on the levee, Sunday afternoon stroll, just anywhere in our community, any event, any of the festivals. Once we start coming back online, when COVID restrictions are lifted, could now have it under their clothes, and nobody would. I mean, you wouldn't know.
Exactly.
And you wouldn't know how to really. I mean, you just don't know how to interact with them at that point. You have to be extremely cautious, and then that could often, to me, could lead to maybe some things that we all don't want to happen, because maybe you mistakenly thought that they had a weapon, and it might have been something else. But let me just ask you this question as it relates to gun sales at gun shows. So right now, if you have somebody purchase a gun from somebody at a gun show, there would be absolutely no way or no requirement for a background check if they decided to buy it at that point. I mean, at least now there is at least a background check that's done, correct?
I don't think that's going to change with this law. If I'm not mistaken, it doesn't change.
Okay.
But what is not being considered, everyone's thinking about the law-abiding citizen. And everybody's thinking about those who read and understand what is expected of them before they do use a firearm or carry one. What they're not realizing is 21-year-olds are only going to hear one thing. I'm 21. I don't have a violation of law. I can carry. Anything else, they're not going to have a clue about why, when, where, so forth and so on. And I think that's the part that's being lost by all of the other proponents of this concealed carry process.
The other part of that is the training. For me,
Training. That's training and use of the firearm.
and when you talk about 21-year-old, there's some young people that really know how to use a weapon. They've been trained since they were a little kid, but then there are
Very
others who have not, and they would, under this, if this bill would pass, they wouldn't have to. And then we have individuals who are not trained, who are carrying weapons, and I believe that anything of this magnitude definitely should require training.
40 years in law enforcement, Senator. 40 years in law enforcement. I'm not allowed to carry my weapon under my commission if I don't get my proper training and proper instruction from firearms and shoot a certain level in a course. I'm not allowed to carry it.
And along that line, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very good point. And then you guys have to go, is it annually?
Annually,
Yes,
yes.
ma'am.
And receive additional training.
Yes,
For
ma'am.
concealed carry, that's correct.
But we're going to allow just average citizens just to carry without any training.
Exactly.
It's good to see you, Colonel. It's been a while since I've seen you. Good to see you here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Chief Murphy Paul is trying to get here to testify on behalf of on the concept of not approving this bill. I don't know if he'll make it in time, but hopefully he will.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up.
His comments did mirror New Orleans.
Exactly. His comments mirrored Sean Ferguson's, but he's trying to get here. He had a hearing, but he's on his way now.
He did call me, and he shared my concerns. And with the proliferation of guns that we have, especially here in Baton Rouge, the high rate of crime that we have here in Baton Rouge, in many of our urban cities, he's extremely concerned that he thinks that this is only going to add to that factor of individuals being able to now carry without having to have a permit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barrow. Senator Carter, do you have a question?
I asked state police a moment ago, and I was quite frankly a little astonished by their answer, so I'll ask you the same question. Public safety.
You didn't have any training, did you? Huh?
What's the concern? What concern do you have about how this affects public safety? For little old ladies, for people who the greater propensity of having people that have weapons that have not been trained.
I personally feel that the more weapons, we have a lot of weapons out there. We have a lot of illegal weapons out there. We have people out there who should never have had a weapon
But
in the first place.
under this law, we're allowing a person to have access without any training.
a 21-year-old or
or
older,
41-year-old for that matter.
21 or older, they can have a firearm without any training whatsoever. All they have to do is have a clean record, and normally would be eligible to get a license. But now they don't have to get the license and the training and the education that goes with it. That's all it's doing. And they're not taking away their constitutional right. They're alleging their
I'm just
constitutional
listening for
right.
something that tells me this does not impact public safety. And so far, I haven't heard anybody say it doesn't, because at the end of the day, public safety and making sure that people are safe, having people that are not trained is dangerous in any aspect. And I think the trainer that was up here agreed to that. That if a person, the chances of something happening and someone being injured or harmed, a citizen, the propensity is greater when a person is not properly trained.
Definitely. Because there are so many aspects of it. When you say properly trained in the utilization of the firearm, but also
Weapon safety,
also as well as when they should be. The rule we have is if you're going to pull it, be ready to use it. So if they're going to pull it, do they know whether they have a right to be ready to use it?
And that danger is on both sides, right? The
On
danger
both
is on the
sides,
person that has that weapon who may think because they have a weapon they can use it.
Exactly.
Or a person that may be the person on the other side of that weapon that may become the victim. You potentially have two victims. The victim of the person who should have never had the weapon out because they were not trained to properly use it.
Right.
And then the person who became the victim because that person didn't know what they're doing. And that person, one person may be going to jail, and another person may be going into a box.
Exactly.
Neither of which is good.
I concur, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ward.
Thank you. How y'all doing today?
Fine,
Very well, Senator.
Good. What's the penalty currently for being caught with a concealed gun on your person without a permit?
I think it's a misdemeanor charge. I'm not exactly sure.
The reason I ask that is, so if I wake up tomorrow morning and I decide I'm going commit armed robbery and I put my pistol in my pocket, or something much worse, I don't think the fact that I could potentially get a misdemeanor is really going to stop me.
Not at all.
From going commit that much worse crime. And I guess that's kind of my concern about the argument of this. I just feel like the people that would utilize this as an avenue to go create more crimes is not who this is going to benefit. Who it's going to benefit are the ones that they are law-abiding citizens, and they do a misdemeanor summons would concern them. So sometimes I feel like we kind of overplay a little bit the weight of what a misdemeanor summons does, and I'm not making light of that. And I understand. Look, law enforcement has a tremendously difficult. Chief Knapp, our families have known each other for a very long time, and I come from a family of law enforcement, so I understand the job that you guys do. And so I just was concerned. And then on the training piece, I guess my thought on that is whether you're wearing a jacket or you're. I was walking through Walmart about 2 weeks ago, and somebody was there pushing a buggy, had their wife and kids with them, and they had a pistol on their side. To be quite honest with you, for me personally, I'd rather them just had it in their pocket. It seems like it would have been. Now look, that's from a layperson standpoint. I'm not looking at it from a law enforcement standpoint, but it just seemed like it would have been less of an interesting interaction with everybody walking by them if it had just been on their person in a more discreet way?
Senator, I've been carrying a firearm since April Fool's Day 1965. 24/7, I conceal carry. My concern is I've been trained. I know when to pull it, when not to pull it, and I've rarely pulled it. The problem is hotheads, young guys, anybody can carry, anybody's concealed, they're going to be popping off at each other in a heartbeat. That's the difference. No training, no idea of the law, they really don't know the consequence because in too many cases, even when there is someone shot, killed, whatever, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. They don't do enough time. They feel like, it's just another shooting today. And putting it where they can now put it under their clothing and all of them can walk around with it, I think they're going to be popping it off a whole lot more than they have been.
Well, and I think I agree with almost everything you just said until you got towards the end. I think that a lot of the shootings and things that go on, I don't think that for the most part, if I'm hot-headed or if I go out and do whatever I'm doing with the thought process that I may end up in a shooting situation for whatever reason, that I'm just gonna whether or not I have a permit is gonna make the difference.
No, the difference is if you have to have a permit, those who want a permit, those law-abiding persons who would go and get a permit, that makes a difference. Those kids, those youth, those who are running around who don't have one now, that will be able to put one under their clothing, that's the ones I'm worried about.
And I think where I differ on you with that is this: if there was some grave consequence to not having the permit, like there was some real big consequence, like if you don't have this concealed carry permit as it is written in law today, you go to jail for a year, or you have a felony on your record for the rest of your life or something like that. I could see it preventing people who now want to have a concealed carry. But for the most part, the people we're discussing, if I'm going to rob a bank tomorrow, I'm not saying, you know what, I might get that misdemeanor, so I'm not going to put this gun in my pocket. And that's what I'm saying has that ever been thought of?
No, I don't. I really agree. I agree with you there. It's just that I just see more interaction from amongst individuals, not the guy who's going out to commit a crime. Then I'm talking about just on the street, concealed in the urban areas. I think it's going to create more firearm shootings.
Okay.
All right.
And look, again, I appreciate
That's
everything
my
y'all
concern.
do. So
Thank
you.
Chief Paul, welcome to our committee. My police chief from Baton Rouge. If you just want to state your name briefly, we're in the middle of asking some questions, and you can stay at the table and help answer. If you want to just make a quick statement.
Yes, sir. Chief Murphy, Paul, Baton Rouge Police Department. I apologize for being late. I'm speaking on behalf of what's going on in policing in America right now. And what I'm asking, there's a tinderbox that's happening in America right now, specifically when it comes to policing. I see this legislation as an officer safety issue with our police officers right now. I believe the current concealment laws that are in place, because the training that goes along with that, and those who have those licenses have been instructed and trained on how to interact with law enforcement. And I just believe right now that the timing of this isn't good, particularly in the city of Baton Rouge, and I'm asking you for consideration to not approve this legislation at this time.
Thank you for your testimony, and you can stay at the table because Senator Barrow and Senator Abraham have some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to see you, Chief. So you just answered a question that I had mentioned earlier as it relates to training of police officers and training of the individuals who are currently, right now, when you get your concealed weapon, you have to go through the training and the permitting process. And you really answered that question very thoroughly because I asked about how important the training was. And so you just mentioned something that I had not heard earlier in terms of how individuals who go through the training are taught how to interact with law enforcement when they come into contact with law enforcement. So can you just kind of take me a little bit through what that process looks like and what it may look like now if this bill were to pass? How can this actually change policing, and what would that mean for the training of police officers?
Well, right now, part of the concealment piece, those persons who are concealed when they come in contact with a law enforcement officer are required to notify that police officer that they have a concealed weapon, and there are consequences for not following those instructions as it currently states in the concealed handgun law.
So that's a part of the training process right now.
That is part of the law. That is correct. For carrying a concealed handgun.
Handgun. So if we didn't have this, then individuals getting guns would not know that they needed to do that necessarily. And so now police officers, when they encounter individuals, they would almost have to assume that every time they stop someone that they probably have a weapon, possibly.
With the current state of policing in America today, what I am telling you from my experience in law enforcement, that this is a law enforcement, a police officer safety issue right now. And I think the timing of this legislation isn't good for policing, particularly in cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge. I respect everyone's right. We do understand that we have responsible gun owners that we may not necessarily have those issues with, but the reality is policing in America today is very complex. Emotions are high right now, and I just don't think the timing of this legislation is what's best for policing, specifically in cities like the city of Baton Rouge and also New Orleans.
And so you said individuals' rights, and so we're not taking away anybody's rights to be able to bear arms. That's the one thing I want to keep saying, because we're not doing that. But what we are doing is saying that individuals who will have the right to bear arms can now do so without being trained and without having any background checks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to thank y'all for coming and testify, and I do have the utmost respect for police officers, military. I really do. And this is a kind of a tough one for me, but I like to deal in numbers. And so I think someone at the table said that they thought that if you had constitutional carry, there would be a lot of popping off or a lot of shootings and those sorts of things. But statistically, what I've heard from the other side, unless you can give me something different, excuse me, statistically, I'm hearing that the states that had constitutional carry, it actually goes the other way. So I'm hearing, I mean, is one your opinion, or is it based on facts, or is it based on numbers? I'm assuming that the other group was based on numbers, that constitutional carry states crime was down. So I'd like you to address that.
I'm the one who said about popping off, sir, and my thought is these other states, the 20 states, I don't know exactly which 20 they are, but when they said Maine and Vermont, you can't compare that to places like Louisiana, New York, California, places like that. The population, the urban population is what I'm speaking of. And they don't have a major urban population in these particular places.
Well, I'm just wondering, it seems like that you would have some in this map. You would have a lot of urban populations in this map here, not in every state, but I know in a lot of them, and that's just what I was kind of getting
I'd like to know their numbers in Texas.
No,
they didn't mention Texas, of course.
I think this is just starting in Texas, I think.
I mean, look where they are. I mean, they're mostly central states with...
Yeah. But like Tennessee and Ohio and those states that have a lot of urban, I sure would like to know what the metrics are on those states.
And I will concede to you, and because I don't know the numbers there, and I did say it based upon my opinion.
No, I understand. I'm not trying to catch you in anything.
No, I'm just being straightforward with you. Yeah, it is my opinion that's something that I would be concerned with.
Yeah.
Having always lived in the metropolis from the Ninth Ward of New Orleans to New York City and back to Louisiana to Baton Rouge, my experience has always been that in the urban areas, you've got hothead youth and I don't think we want to put more guns in their hands, not especially under their clothing. That's me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Carter?
I just wanted to note that Texas just announced that they failed to have the votes to pass permitless carry for the similar reasons that you've mentioned and ones that I've consistently talked about, which is, for me, the issue of public safety and training. I think it's fair to assume, and I think the trainers that were here earlier spoke of, the better the training, the less opportunity for mishaps. Almost in any endeavor in life, people that are trained are better at handling the equipment in this case, or any situation. Better trained, better performance, less accidents, less harm to the community.
Sir.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for testifying today. Chief Paul, please fill out a red card before you leave for us. And let me call up the rest of the people who want to speak in opposition. Once again, I'd ask
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Senator.
So for the rest of the people, if you want to waive speaking, that's fine. If you want to speak, we'd like to hear from you, but I just ask once again that you be brief and try not to repeat what other people have said. Monica Gerhardt, is she here still? Caitlin Janua, Janua, I believe. Joshua. Is she here? These are all people who in opposition and wish to speak. Okay. Sandy Brown, is she here? Ms. Brown, come on up and have a seat at the table. Ms. Joshua, please have a seat. Okay, Ms. Brown, if you want to go first and just state your name and give us your testimony, please, ma'am.
My name is Sandy Brown. I'm representing myself, and I'm delighted to be here. Senator Foyle, I live in your district, so it's especially nice having you chair this meeting.
Thank you. If you could
First-
get a little bit closer to the mic, too, it's hard at first to hear you.
Okay, is that better?
It is.
Okay. First, I find it odd that SB 118 would make permitless concealed carry possible in the places I frequent, like stores, restaurants, public gathering places. Yet we could not enter this building today without a security check. Guns are not allowed here, I gather. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Something about this strikes me as highly hypocritical, since all places do not have the security that you can afford to extend to yourselves and your guests in our capital. I urge you to keep this in mind as you consider this bill. I ask that you consider the fairness of this bill as well, since it rolls back some measures already in place to make sure concealed carriers have adequate training to carry such weapons. It lowers the age restrictions, I think, as well to 18 from 21. So I think that is another
It
consideration.
still keeps it at 21, I
It
believe.
keeps it at 21. The House bill, the corresponding House bill is the one that lowers it to 18. Because we all know how calm and measured we are at 18 to make important decisions. I know I did. We do not allow people to drive until they reach a certain age and only after they pass the driver's test. They have to have a license, have it renewed. They have to follow many other regulations like insurance, not driving intoxicated, and so on. Yet someone like me, who has never owned or fired a gun, could purchase and carry a concealed weapon without ever having any training to use it. We all live with rules and regulations in our society, and gun training should remain in place for those wishing to carry weapons. I would ask a question. Have any of you ever come face to face with someone carrying a loaded gun without adequate training?
And you can ask it as a rhetorical question.
It's a rhetorical. I have. And that person was my father in 1973. And I will relate a very personal story here. I was studying in Europe when I was 19 in 73. Two men entered our house and raped my mother at knife point. My father, who had been a Navy veteran, serving in the Pacific, got for the first time a handgun. I was 2 weeks from coming home from my trip. My parents elected not to bring me home alone under those circumstances. So when I got home 2 weeks later, I walked into a family forever changed. They had just moved into a new home. I had spent 4 nights there before leaving. I got up to use the bathroom that first night after learning what happened to my mother. I was heartbroken, shocked, jet-lagged, horrified. And I bumped into a wall because I was not familiar with this home. I had slept there a very few nights, got up, bumped into a wall. My father, who I cherished and loved, and who loved me, his only daughter, came roaring out of my parents' bedroom with the gun pointed at me. I screamed, "Daddy, it's me." He dropped the gun, sobbing to his knees. He was not trained to use that gun. He got it in a reactionary phase because of what happened to my mother. He could have shot me that night. He could have killed me that night. And I guarantee you, if that had happened, if my father had killed me that night, he would have turned the gun on himself. He could not have lived with that. Have you ever been in an armed intruder drill in an elementary school? Again, a rhetorical question, but I have been in that. My only daughter and her only child, my only grandchild, live in Texas. After the Sandy Hook shootings in 2011, I believe, the schools there instituted live intruder drills. This was a pre-K to 4th grade school. I volunteered there because, as any grandmother does, you try to get as much time with those baby grands as you can. So if by volunteering, I could volunteer in her classroom and so forth. I was advised, as all volunteers were, that the shooter drill would be held that day. I knew it was coming, and I knew it was a drill, but the teachers didn't know, and the students didn't know. Can you imagine the pressure our children are growing up in this society, where school shootings are commonplace, where they hear about these things? Maybe little kids don't watch the news or read the paper, but I guarantee you their siblings do. They talk about it, they hear about it. It is horrifying. We are placing a burden on our children that we did not grow up with. I'm 68. I'm looking at some of you, and I'm guessing y'all are in my age range, though probably younger. We did not grow up like this, where we were fearful of guns. Teachers have a split-second decision to make. In a fire drill, you know what you do. You exit the building because the building's on fire, right? In a school shooting, you don't do that because the shooter could very well be outside. You have split-second decisions to make. A lot has been come up about the Second Amendment. And I would say this: if guns make us safer, why is the United States the country with the highest homicide rate in the world? We have more guns per capita than any other country, developed country. I've been very blessed in my life. I have traveled to 40 countries. I've been all through Europe. I've been to Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Northern Africa, Central, South America, Canada, you name it, I've probably been there. The Galapagos, Machu Picchu, wherever you want to name it. I am safer outside of this country than I am inside of it. I've walked the streets of Parisian cities, places in Europe, without being accosted. Australia had one massive shooting in 1997. They banned assault rifles. People can carry weapons. People can get permits. But why is it that this is a uniquely American problem? If more guns keep us safe, why aren't we safer? And the idea that a good guy with the gun can stop a bad guy with the gun is a fallacy. President Reagan was surrounded by Secret Service, among the most highly trained people in the world, and yet he was shot. So if more guns keep us safer, why aren't we safer? I'm going to ask you a final question, because I've asked you 2 already. If a plane fell from the sky every single day, in the United States every single day, killing 90 to 100 people every single day, wouldn't we demand better air regulations? Wouldn't we beg for somebody to look at what is wrong? That many people are killed in the United States every single day by gun violence. People can own guns for hunting, sports shooting, etc., but the problem of gun violence, to the extreme we see it, is unique to this country. Yes, we have a Second Amendment, but it also was for the purposes of forming and maintaining a militia. And no less than Justice Antonin Scalia, appointed by President Reagan, said that the right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose. This is on record. I invite you to look it up. It came in the decision, District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, when he affirmed the right of individuals to keep and bear guns, that it did not just apply to the militia. Finally, I'm a historian, and I'll give you a little background on something. After our Revolutionary War, the Constitutional Army, the Constitutional Army was banned. We did not have a standing army for a number of years. So the right to form a militia was important. We had no standing army. We also had no police. We had no sheriffs. We had no state police. We didn't have federal marshals. We didn't have any of that. So what we did have were people who had weapons for personal protection and hunting. They also had militias to protect our coast from foreign forces, as what happened in 1812 when the British tried to regain the American colonies. But a lot of the armaments were kept in armories. We have one somewhere in the state capitol grounds. When John Brown tried to start a insurrection of slaves, he raided the armory at Harper's Ferry because that's where the guns and weapons were. Why is this a problem in the United States? Shouldn't we be concerned about passing gun legislation that makes us safer, rather than a bill that makes us all less safe by doing away with sensible rules, like learning how to properly use weapons? I don't understand this at all. How do you explain it to your children? Are you going to wait to take action till it's your child, your grandchild, your friend, your spouse? And as Senator Ward brought up about concealed carry, he prefers not to see the guns. I want to see them. I want to see them carried on their side so I can make a determination. Do I want to sit in a restaurant with that person? Do I want to be in a store with that person? Do I want to sit next to that person in church? I want to see the gun. Because if I don't see the gun, then I could be the next victim in a mass shooting somewhere.
Ms. Brown, thank you for coming today. That was, I know, a very tough story, and we appreciate
I didn't give you a lot of facts. I gave you personal stories because you're tired of facts.
And thank you for taking the time to come down here and talk to us today. Ms. Joshua?
Yes, of course. I'll be rather quick. Caitlin Joshua with Power Coalition, as well as Faith in Action. On behalf of Faith in Action, just in case you don't know what type of group we are, we're a group of faith leaders, faith-based organizers that address gun violence on the local level. And right now we spend a great deal of our time organizing robust strategies, listening sessions, you name it. And we're finding a lot of times in order to solve the systemic issues, one of the things that we're coming up against is constantly playing defense in the legislature with bills like SB 118. We feel like this bill would just provide an opportunity for more negligence in what many folks aforementioned as urban communities, Black and brown communities. If we're going to solve the issue of addressing negligence or gun violence in the state of Louisiana, we don't feel like this is the way to go. Louisiana is already number 2 in the nation for cost as it is associated with gun homicides, assault injuries, as well as shootings. And so earlier, I know there was a question about a fiscal component. That is the fiscal component. Also mentioned, I see on here 2020 permitless carry, a great deal of the cities and states that you guys have on the map. As it already stands, I know folks said earlier that there was not a crime component or crime did not increase. We have bases in every single state that was mentioned in the 20 states. I think it was Dan Zelinsky who stated that there was no constitutional permanent laws, but there was no direct correlation to increase in crime rate. That's not true. And we have the data and the tracking to back that up. Lastly, I'll just say in terms of long-term addressing long-term gun violence in the state of Louisiana, for us, this is a step backwards. We've got a host of issues already in the urban and Black and brown communities as it pertains to gun violence, access to guns, and spending $300 for a permit is not too much to ask if we're pretty much paying the price for safety and well-being of our communities. So in our opinion, if you don't have the $300 to be able to do that and you don't want to invest in training, then you don't need a gun. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Barrow for a question.
Not really a question. I just want to thank both of you for coming today and for outlining specifically, Ms. Brown, some of the things that you really outlined, especially as it relates to our children and what would we do. One of the things that was really striking to me that you said, because I thought about the Boeing, was it 757? They were having a lot of problems with that particular plane. And when you use it as an analogy, certainly we would demand action immediately. If that was occurring. But somehow
that is happening. 90 to 100 people. I think our gun deaths last year in the United States were between 36 and 40,000. So that's 100 a day. Yeah. And that happens and I would remind this committee, that happens in no other developed country anywhere in the world. None. Look it up.
And guns are not making us safer. That was the other thing that you said, and you really drove home for me. That really made a great point. And to you, Ms. Joshua, I just want to thank you for highlighting the point as it relates to Black and brown communities and individuals. And when my husband decided when he was alive to go get a gun, he went through the whole proper process in getting the permit, going through the training. And I chose not to because I have always chosen not to carry a weapon. But it appears to me that may be something that I need to change since we're just making it just easier and easier for anyone to carry. And I, like you, when I saw a gentleman at the store with his gun on, I made a choice at that time with my grandson that we were going to leave the store because I knew that he was carrying. And I didn't know what may actually happen during that situation. But at least I had the choice. I could make the choice then to leave.
And I want to clarify one thing, too, about my mother. Some people in here might think if she had had a gun, she could have defended herself. I want to clarify how her rape came to happen. We had just bought a new house in a developing subdivision, and my mother, one of the kindest people ever to walk the earth, would bring the workers iced tea, ice water, lemonade, whatever. They were told when working that if they needed water, they could use the hose if she wasn't home. The foundation for the house adjacent to us had been poured, and when that happens, our work stops because the foundation has to harden. There were some laborers who had been hired, day laborers, to pick up trash and so forth. Mother did not realize that the regular crew had left, and these men had seen my mother offer water before. So they came to the door, knocked on her door, and she said, "Yes, I'll get you some iced tea." When she did that, they pulled the guns and came in. Having a gun on her person, unless she wore it in the house in 1973, which most suburban housewives would not have helped her. There's an element of surprise in all of this. And I just wanted to clarify that she would not have been safer if she had had a gun on her person that day. She was acting out of kindness. And what was remarkable about my mother was after she recovered from this and worked hard, she still was that same kind lady. Wow. She still was that same kind lady. What kept her safe was being surrounded by love, her faith in God, and her family, not a gun.
Thank you.
you for your personal testimony. Thank you for your courage, and sorry that incident happened to your mom. But thank you for sharing that with us and sharing how she overcame it as well.
If it helps save a life, she would be okay with sharing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barry. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Let me call up the next three. Susan E. Snelson, in opposition, would like to speak. Angel Bradford, in opposition, would like to speak. And Earl Domingue, in opposition, would like to speak. We'll give them a few minutes to get over here. Okay. Ms. Nelson, you can have a seat.
Thank you.
Mr. Domingue? Would you like to speak still?
Yes.
Go ahead and have a seat, please. And Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Yeah, if y'all just introduce yourselves, and if you could be brief, but please get whatever points that we need to hear across. Go ahead, Ms. Nelson.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan East Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families. I'm here on behalf of Louisiana's children. And let me start by prefacing all of my testimony with the fact that I am not only a gun owner, I have been trained to own a gun, and my husband has been to the CCL class now twice, and he is in the process of getting his permit at the moment. I will also say that our gun instructor claims that I'm a better shot. That's something that he vigorously objects to. So, open carrying is one thing. If I have children and I see someone open carrying, I can make a decision to take my children away from that area. In Louisiana, if we're concealed carrying, I don't know that you're carrying, but I know that you were required to have a background check and that you had to complete some training. It's a 10-hour training. You have to prove that you can shoot the gun. You have to prove they go through all of these scenarios in the training. You know, if you're in a Circle K, and I know this because my husband just had the training last week and he's come home and telling me about it. And he says, if I'm in a Circle K and somebody pulls a gun on the clerk, what do I do? And the gun instructor said, you don't do anything unless you've thought through what is going to be the end result of your situation. And so that training is very intensive. It's good training. It helps them answer their questions. Concealed carry is a whole other ball game from open carry. I think that really needs to be said here. And to the point that, you know, we've got this constitutional concealed carry. Right now, you can lose your permit for 5 years when you violate the rules. If you're 0.05 alcohol, if you've got more than a drink in you, you can lose your permit for 5 years. With constitutional carry, there's no prohibition on you then returning and doing the exact same thing again, except that you'll get charged with another misdemeanor. Big deal, I think, to a lot of people, especially when we're talking about a misdemeanor. So, you know, someone said that it's a victimless crime. And I take issue with that. Because when we talk about the trauma that children are forced to endure when guns start getting fired, that's not a victimless trauma. Even if the child is not physically hit by the gun, they are still experiencing the trauma of what happens when guns are fired. And again, I say, if you're open carrying, someone can make a decision. I don't want to be here where people are open carrying. I can go somewhere else. But if we have concealed carry without training and without the basic restrictions, 10 hours of training, 10 hours, and background checks to make people feel a little bit more safe, then we are really doing our children a disservice. So I just ask, think about the children, and I will just end with this one comment that my husband made the other day. He said, well, if it's an area where I think I need to conceal carry, I'm probably not going there.
Thank you. Ms. Bradford?
Yeah. Angel Bradford's my name, and I am a volunteer chapter leader with Moms Demand Action. We are an organization, our chapter here in Louisiana represents gun owners, folks in rural and suburban areas. And I'm here because I care about all of Louisiana, not just urban, not just people that look like me. And I want to first highlight that what we're talking about today, SB 118 and the permitting process. The permitting process is just a step in preventing gun violence. It's just a step in protecting communities. Our side or our folks are always charged with the burden or responsibility of proposing something that will stop everything. And because it doesn't stop everything, then why should we do it? But we still do not support SB 118. And I'll tell you why. Supporters of permitless carry will tell you that criminals don't follow laws and this bill only impacts law-abiding citizens. But that argument doesn't match up with the reality on the ground. Our permitting system ensures people get a background check and some hands-on safety training, including actually firing a handgun before carrying a firearm in our communities, around our families. What we must understand is that Louisiana's permitting system, what we must understand is that Louisiana's permitting system is the only background check a person may ever receive. And let me repeat, the permit requires a background check in all scenarios, and this bill takes that away. Louisiana does not require background checks for firearm sales, and so I just contradicted myself, not in all scenarios. Louisiana does not require a background check for firearm sales by unlicensed sellers, such as between strangers. In Louisiana, according to a report from Everytown, there's an average of nearly 7,000 posts for firearms available for sale by unlicensed sellers in Louisiana through one single website, for which no background check will be required. The report also found that across the country, 1 in 9 people who tried to buy a gun online were legally prohibited from having one, a rate 7 times higher than the denial rate at gun stores or in other contexts where background checks are required. So let's be clear. Criminals are indeed buying guns from unlicensed sellers because they can do so without a background check. Right now, if they bought that gun and carried it concealed in public without a permit, they would be breaking the law. By requiring a person to obtain a background check before getting a permit, law enforcement can use this tool to stop people with dangerous histories from carrying concealed guns in public. In fact, since the inception of Louisiana's concealed handgun permit unit in 1996, the permit has either denied, suspended, or revoked nearly 14,000 permits, which was stated before by Senator Barrow. With the passage of this bill, that all goes away. Why would we want to make criminals feel more comfortable carrying in public, knowing they can now freely carry, no questions asked? Law enforcement oppose this bill because they understand that would be the new reality. Give law enforcement the tools to stop criminals from carrying guns in our community. This bill would do the opposite. Law enforcement would be stripped of that tool. Listen to them, as they are the ones with real-world experience as to how this would complicate their jobs. Additionally, Senator Abraham did ask about crime rates, I believe, and I do want us to be sure to distinguish crime rates. That includes all crime rate versus crime with firearms. And so for states and areas that have seen an increase in gun violence, so assault with firearms after permitless carry, we do have some data I'll share in a second, and these are independent studies that center research on an increase in assault with firearms, not just crime overall, because crime in the country overall is down, taking aside the COVID-19 context. Supporters will also say that permitless won't turn us into the Wild West. That's a pretty low bar and simplifies the very complex problem of gun violence that we have. They say emboldening criminals to carry guns, no questions asked, will somehow reduce crime. Here are the facts. States that have permitless carry have experienced increases in violent crime specifically. Since Arizona enacted permitless carry legislation in 2010, the annual rate of aggravated assaults committed with a firearm in the state increased by 8%. Since Alaska enacted a permitless carry bill in 2003, the state has experienced a 65% increase in the annual rate of aggravated assaults with a gun. And just to go back to my Arizona stat, that translates to an average of 921 more gun-related aggravated assaults in recent years, which includes 2017 to 2018. Additionally, in our state, we already have the second highest rate of gun homicide deaths in the U.S. Gun deaths in the state have increased by 15% from 2010 to 2019. Firearms are the leading cause of death of children. We want to work with you to find solutions to these problems, but this bill will only make them worse, which is why I say it's just a tool. It's a piece of the larger puzzle. Finally, I want to address the argument that permitless open carry is allowed in Louisiana, and this bill isn't any different. It's not a stretch. Simply put, reasonable gun owners have not traditionally carried firearms openly, and the lack of laws about open carry does not mean that this is a policy that should be extended to concealed carry. A majority of states require a permit to carry concealed handgun, including Alabama, Georgia, Florida, us, North Carolina, South Carolina, and of course Texas, who can't even get the votes to pass it because it's a dangerous bill. SB 118 would put Louisiana in a minority of states, including in the South. Please oppose SB 118 and any efforts at permitless carry, as there are many this session, and support public safety and law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Domingue, please.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I speak as someone who has served for over 25 years in a community that has been mentioned here today as an example. I'll start by saying that in poorer and marginalized communities, $300 is not a pot of gold. And so persons can afford to get the proper training if they tend to do so. I'd also suggest that putting guns in the hands of, excuse me, of people who have not been trained is an issue that will only make matters worse in our community. I talk a lot to the people in the community where I serve, and even to some persons whose background don't suggest that they were always law-abiding citizens. And one of the things that they complain about in this current generation of younger people who have guns is that quite often they are using guns that are too big for them or that they cannot control. And so thus you have a number of people getting hurt by people who don't have any business with guns in the first place, but then secondly, who don't have any idea how to use them. Lastly, I would ask you not to get caught up in partisan data, because anybody can use numbers to say anything that they want them to. Don't get caught up in assumptions, but make decisions that are based on what is best for the citizens of our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Barrow for some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Pastor Domingue, so good to see you. Thank you so very much for your hard work in our community, always being a part of the fabric of the community. And I know that you definitely on the ground and in touch with the people that we serve. Ms. Nelson, Ms. Bradford, thank you so very much for your testimony. And I'm glad that each one of you brought out the points. I just want to bring this to light because I just received this information. A study by Ingram K shows that 88% of Americans think that anyone carrying a gun should receive training. 88% of Americans, according to this study. And then from John B. Hopkins, there's a study that says over 80% of gun owners and non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, agree that high safety standards are critical in issuing concealed carry permits. And so, I mean, I think that was just echo, but it's also in concert with what many of the people of our country believe as well. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you all for coming down. And I'm going to call we have three more people who would like to speak in opposition to these. I believe are the last three cards I have. Fred Husser, MD, Nanette Olivier, and Glenn Burns. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Fred Husserl. I'm a physician. I live in New Orleans. I've been in Louisiana since 1972. At the end of 72, on a fateful evening, as an intern at Charity, I was on call when we had the massacre and the Howard Johnson. I'd like to remind members of the audience, this did not start out in a simple way. It started out with somebody who used a gun in an inappropriate way. I spent 4 years at Charity. I took care of many people that had significant illnesses after a gunshot wound. Then I spent my life as a nephrologist at Oxnard, and I took care of many people who required ICU care after a gunshot wound. I spoke with a friend of mine who lives in Lafayette, who's house sitting in the 9th Ward. Spoke with him this morning driving here. And he says, Fred, I heard it again. I said, what? He said, I heard the crackle every night. He's house sitting a house in the 9th Ward for a week. Every night he heard gunshots. Every night. Some of them sounded like an AK-47. This happens time and time and time again. This bill makes it easier for people that are not responsible to own a gun. If my child is going over for a overnight sleep at somebody's house, or my granddaughter does that, I'd like to know that if there's a gun in that house, that person that owns the gun knows what they have to do with the gun, what the gun safety regulations are, how you can put this away, how can you protect the children in your medium with you so that they can not be at risk. On a personal basis, my wife and I took a course 1974-75 on the use of gun and shooting, and we chose not to buy a gun. We chose not to buy it because the instructor clearly told us, if you're in a situation where you're forced to use the gun, you must shoot to kill, and you can't think twice. And that to me was absolutely unacceptable. I could not face that possibility. Now, a lot of people that don't have training will have that same gut reaction, and they will take a life and then think about it. It's too late. One's in jail, the other one's in a coffin. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Olivier.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nanette Olivier. I'm a resident in Baton Rouge, and I'm here with my colleagues here to express a strong opposition to Senate Bill 118, which would allow people to carry concealed handguns in public places without a permit, without a background check, and notably without safety training. And that would in effect dismantle Louisiana's system of the current system of a responsible gun ownership. Our current handgun permitting system requires training on how to carry firearms responsibly in public, ensuring that only responsible people can carry these guns. This training, very importantly, includes the firing of a live weapon. SB 118 would remove these safeguards and allow concealed carry by people who currently cannot get a permit, such as violent offenders and teenagers. And this is not a partisan issue, as I think the concern has been raised here. Senator Barrow, you spoke about, I think, 88% of people in the United States back responsible measures, legislation. One study specific to Louisiana, and we are a conservative state, indicated that 73% of Louisiana voters opposed making it legal to carry a loaded handgun in public without a permit or safety training. 73% of the people you're representing in this state. I come here today and I'm speaking to you as a mother and a grandmother, and I see the fear in young people and children of dying by gun violence in their schools and other public and community places. Are we going to allow our children to bear this burden of stress? And those of us who grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s really did not have this level of fear that our current young population does today. Can we not agree to reasonable efforts to curb the violence? I'm not naive, and one piece of legislation is not going to stop the violence. But what are our tools at hand? And I want to address some comments that were presented a little bit earlier, I think by Mr. Dan Zelinka. He suggested that there were folks in the audience here today with red shirts on who would come to you talking about the sky is falling and that there's blood in the streets. And I thought about that, and I am not here to tell you that the sky is falling, but rest assured, there is blood in the streets of the cities and towns across Louisiana. I know I live in one, and every day I pick up the paper, and it's almost like you become inured to the gun violence because it's an everyday happening. And I want to speak about one other comment that was mentioned up here, and that was that carrying guns was a God-given right. And really, I don't hold that personal belief, but what I do believe that it is your responsibilities as our lawmakers to use the tools at hand to create legislation that at least gives us the opportunity to curb the violence that we're currently facing. So I urge you to take a stand for responsible gun ownership in Louisiana, and please veto this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
Yes, and I'll be quite brief because you've had a lot of very good testimony. I've been an attorney for 48 years. I was a prosecutor for 8 years, and I carried a weapon for 3 of those years. I got training from the FBI on how to carry a weapon and what you have to do if you draw it. And people say is the truth. If you pull your weapon, you're supposed to kill someone. I don't think anyone without training should be able to walk around our city and our streets carrying a firearm, because I want to know that they have one, because I want to go the other way. I would only lastly say one thing is, besides the people on the street, I want to know when my children go to somebody's house, is that a house where people carry firearms all the time without anyone knowing? And when people come to my house, if it's open carry, I know they have a gun and I can tell them to leave. If they walk in my house with a gun hidden, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. Ms. Karen White, I didn't forget you. You did want to make a few brief comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Karen White, I'm Executive Counsel for the Louisiana Municipal Association. I just thought there were a few things that might complement the discussions today. First of all, it's important to know that the LMA partners with the Chiefs of Police Association. We work very, very closely with them. We trust them inherently. They are the boots on the ground responders, and so we trust their judgment. But there's been discussion about the constitutional right, the Second Amendment right to bear arms, and this bill seems to envision that that right somehow should be unfettered. And if in fact it were treated as an unfettered right, that is not consistent with the way that the other constitutional amendments have been treated. One of the most sacred of which is the right to free speech. Everybody knows the First Amendment right to free speech. I can name, I'm not going to because it looks like I would probably be flogged if I did, but I can name you at least 19 exceptions to the First Amendment. I can name at least 11 exceptions off the top of my head to the Fourth Amendment, and even the Sixth Amendment that guarantees you the right to confront your accuser has 2 exceptions to it. So to say that this right somehow should be unfettered is simply not accurate. Senator Abraham, I know that you are a man of data, and so I wanted to point out that you may have picked up by now that the data and research on this are sort of on both sides of the fence. It depends on who you wish to believe, but the National Bureau of Economic Research conducted a study, and I'm quoting, quote, "There is not even the slightest hint in the data that right to carry laws reduce violent crime." And in fact, when they looked at the data, they said that it, quote, "substantially raises overall violent crime in the 10 years after they are adopted." So I would leave it to you to do the research and find which you believe to be the most compelling. I would say that the training that comes along, as Mr. Zielinski, I don't want to mispronounce that, I'm sorry if I did, pointed out, is robust. It is a 9-hour training, not just about proficiency in your weapon, but in fact, a great deal of that, and I suspect some of you have taken the class before and you know this, a great deal of that class is spent talking about the laws in Louisiana with regard to using your weapon. I know attorneys who don't know and can't accurately recite what the Castle Doctrine says. So it's not just about handling a weapon, though it's certainly important. It is about being proficient in the law. And I would say a law-abiding citizen can only be a law-abiding citizen if they know what the law is. And that's a huge part of that training. You know, we would like to believe that people voluntarily would choose to do the right thing. I'll give you a quick example. For many, many years, every person in this room, if you bought something online, you were obligated to self-report your sales taxes because it wasn't collected for you. since it became mandatory and it was collected for you, the Remote Sellers Commission is collecting about $25 million a month in sales taxes. So sometimes very well-intended people sometimes need a gentle nudge to do the right thing. The one thing I also wanted to mention is there is an element of public perception that I think is very important. And so it's not just the reality of what this bill purports to do or what it would actually do, but the public perception surrounding a bill like this. What does it do to everyone else in the community, right, when a law like this passes? And historically, the data shows that the public sense of safety tends to drop off dramatically, that people perceive that it is a much more dangerous community to live in. Whether that is the case or not sort of becomes a non-issue if that is the perception, because as you know, perception is reality. With that being said, I'm going to shut up and take any questions you have.
Thank you. Senator Ward, I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner.
No, it's okay. And I'm not sure who would be the right person to answer this, but I've heard it brought up a couple of times over the last 20 or 30 minutes. And it has to do with, I would like to know if my kid went over to someone's house, whether or not they keep firearms. Does somehow right now, or like if you have a concealed permit, are you on some public list that allows everybody to know that? I would just like the committee to know that, because I don't know the answer, but it would be something that I would like to know the answer to.
Yeah, I think, well, Mr. Zelinka, I was looking for your last name.
I'm sorry, I mispronounced your
Come-
name.
Okay, you gave it a good stab.
And Ms. White, I think that's all we have for you. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you can answer just that one question, please.
There is no list. There's actually a Louisiana law that requires that information be not public. Okay. In fact, giving out that information is against the law. There was a bunch of reporters were putting out information on people who own guns in New York, and in response to that, we made the list private.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So at this point, committee, we have no one else wishing to speak in opposition, but I do have some red cards that I need to read. These people are all in opposition and are in opposition, but do not wish to speak. Ryan Haney, Scott Kirkpatrick, Kerry Koch, Representative C. Denise Marcel, and Rachel Gassert. We also received emails that were sent to the committee staff. I'm not going to read all of the emails, but I will tell you they're going to be made part of this record. And there were 100 emails in opposition, and there were 3 in support that the committee received. And finally, I'm a little confused with Kerry Williams. At one point, I think you had a card in support and wanted to speak, and then you turned in a white card. Are you still here, Mr. Williams? I'll note that. Are there any amendments?
My name wasn't read as opposed.
And I'm sorry?
Ellen Finley.
Ms. Finley, did you fill out a card? Okay. Ms. Ellen Finley is here in opposition to the bill. If you could fill it out again for me, I'd appreciate it.
I will fill it out.
Thank you. Okay, members of the committee, what's the pleasure of the committee? Senator Carter?
You know, I've carefully listened to all sides of this, and I will say to you, as a responsible gun owner, one who is properly trained and in fact does have a permit, I support the right to enjoy your constitutional right. I cannot in good confidence or in good conscience support a measure that removes the necessity for someone to be trained. The importance of training and being a responsible gun owner is, I think, a dangerous proposition. The safety of our community, the safety of our senior citizens, the safety of individuals throughout our community is one that we should all stand firm with. Less training equals potentially more road rage. Less training potentially provides for more domestic violence. Less training, more accidental shooting potentially. I don't think any of us want that. I don't think we want to continue to see the kind of violence that people who, in a fit of anger, get involved in a road rage and someone loses their life. Where cases of a husband or wife, or boyfriend or girlfriend, or individual to individual, get into a domestic squabble and someone just pulls a gun out who hadn't been properly trained and know that you shouldn't pull out a weapon in the fit of anger. Part of that training is making sure that you know when and when not to. Part of that training is about knowing how to be a responsible gun owner. Accidental shootings happen when people are not properly trained. People may shoot themselves. They may shoot their child. They may shoot an innocent bystander. Training matters. And for that reason, I cannot support this bill. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion that we defer this bill.
Let me just hold that motion 1 second, Senator Carter, because I did not give Senator Morris the right to close. So, Senator Morris, let me give you the right to close, and then we'll take up the motions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you to all who attended this committee meeting, both for and against the bill. Both sides make good points. I think the people opposing the bill make points relative to other things and not this bill. The bill does not provide unfettered rights. In fact, the right to carry permitlessly is limited to those who are not felons or convicted of a crime of violence. There are 55 crime of violence definitions in our criminal code. This is not a way by which people can get guns more easily. It has nothing to do with people acquiring guns or not acquiring guns. I'll go back to my own police chief of West Monroe, where my office is, and I respect what Mr. Blanche does for his association, but all of his members don't share these views. And I'll repeat, this bill is for law-abiding citizens. It's not for criminals. When I think about the children, I think about the children who might die if it weren't for somebody there, a father or a mother there to protect them, a lawful citizen carrying a weapon. As my police chief said, restrictions don't hurt anyone but law-abiding citizens. When you look at it, the people that are not going to follow the law are criminals. They are going to carry whether the law says they can or cannot. And that point needs to be driven home. And for that reason, I believe that this is a reasonable extension of our rights. And I think every law-abiding citizen in the state should be able to take advantage of it if they so choose. With that, I'll close, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Morris.
I've got court tomorrow, so I'm practicing saying Your Honor.
Senator Carter, let me recognize you again for a motion.
Yeah, and I want to go back, and I'm happy to hear that my dear friend and senator said everything, but he didn't challenge the points that I made, and I respect that. And I'll tell you, and the points I made is training. The points that I make is training, making sure that people are trained, because we know that accidents happen. We know that domestic violence happens. We know that you close. With all due respect, you've closed this. I'm not debating anymore.
Okay. I'm not finished though.
You did finish close.
Well, you're not supposed to ask questions.
I'm not asking a question. At the appropriate time, I would like to come and make my motion, and I have a right to state why. Okay. But it's not debatable.
Senator Morris, were you finished with your closing?
I am now.
Thank you.
And so I'm not asking you a question, sir, my friend. I am saying that less training equals potentially more road rage. Less training potentially equals more domestic violence. Less training potentially equals more accidental shooting. We should always err on the side of responsible gun ownership. We should always err on the side of making sure that people who have lethal weapons know how to use them. With that, I make a motion to reject this bill.
Let me state the motion for the committee. Senator Carter, you're making a motion to defer this bill?
Indefinitely.
So you're making a motion to involuntarily defer the bill. So members, if you want this bill to be involuntarily deferred, you would vote with yes. If you're against
let me restate it. Let me definitively make a motion to reject this bill.
Okay, so let's see if we have a motion in favor first, and then we'll see. Senator Ward.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to make a substitute motion to move the bill favorable.
Okay, Senator Ward makes a motion to move this bill favorable. Senator Carter objects. If you're in favor of this bill being reported favorably, you'll vote yes. If you're against this bill from being reported favorably, you'll vote no. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. Yeah. Senator Carter, you asked for some.
Just to restate again, for clarity purposes.
So Senator Ward has made a motion to move this bill favorably, or report this bill favorably out of this committee. Senator Carter objects to that motion. So if you vote yes, then you support Senator Ward's motion to move this bill favorably out of this committee. If you vote no, you're opposed to the bill being reported favorably out of this committee. Does that clarify? So Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Senator Ward's motion to report the bill favorably.
Senator Ward?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Mizell?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Carter?
No.
No. Senator Barrow?
No.
No. Senator Abraham?
Yes.
Yes. We have 3 yeas, 2 nays.
Okay, members, we have 3 yeas to report the bill favorably and 2 nays. So Senate Bill 118 by Senator Morris is reported favorably. Senator Abraham moves that we adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, before we close the meeting, I think the National Rifle Association's State Director, Matt Harriman, sent a letter into the, and it's going to be part of the record in support of the legislation.
It is.
It is. Okay.
It was
I just want to make sure that I didn't need to introduce
Yes.
this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you,
Morris. We
Mr.
stand
Chairman.
adjourned. Just a long day.
No. Do you deal with, when we have matters in civil law, you deal in your committee?
No, I deal with criminal law.